The video uses AI voice images combined with manual editing. All content is fictional and for entertainment purposes only. Wishing you a relaxing listening experience, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. They say in the underworld, power is the only currency that matters. Cristiano Lombardo ruled his empire with an iron fist and a cold eye, demanding perfection in every ledger, every deal and every person in his orbit. But he underestimated the quiet strength of the woman managing his chaos. Margot Bernard wasn't built to fit a sleek, corporate mold. She was a fortress of efficiency, her loyalty unmatched, her mind sharper than his finest blade. When Cristiano issued an ultimatum about her weight, expecting compliance, her reply didn't just shock him, it ignited a war that would rattle the very foundations of the Lombardo family. The penthouse office of Lombardo Enterprises was a masterpiece of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago, a sprawling grid that Cristiano Lombardo treated as his personal chessboard. The room smelled of expensive leather, Cuban cigars, and faint metallic ozone, the scent of power. Cristiano sat behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, his dark eyes locked on the quarterly reports. At 42, he was a man carved from granite, his suits tailored to emphasize shoulders built for violence and a posture born of absolute authority. He was the head of the Lombardo Syndicate, a legitimate businessman on paper, a ruthless operator in reality. Standing 3 feet from his desk, the designated distance for anyone, not family or marked for death, was Margot Bernard. Margot was 28, a woman whose presence commanded space. She was undeniably beautiful, with a face reminiscent of a Botticelli painting, soft, luminous skin, striking emerald eyes, and full, expressive lips. But in Cristiano's world of sleek, statuesque enforcers and starving socialites, Margot was an anomaly. She was a large woman, carrying her weight with a solid, unapologetic grace. She wore tailored, dark fabrics that draped elegantly, refusing to hide or diminish her size. Her mind, however, was the real reason she was there. "The docks at Calumet," Cristiano murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "The numbers are down 6%. Why?" Margot didn't need to consult her tablet. There was a delay in the shipments from the Russo family, a dispute over union fees at the port of entry. "I rerouted the secondary cash through the rail yards to mitigate the loss, which kept the dip at 6% instead of 14%. Cristiano finally looked up. He didn't offer praise. He expected competence. But he noted the speed of her response. Margot had been his secretary, his gatekeeper, and his unacknowledged second-in-command for 3 years. She knew where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally, and she kept his empire running with terrifying efficiency. "Fix the Russo issue," he ordered. "Send Carlo to make them understand the cost of delays. Already done, Mr. Lombardo. Carlo is meeting them at noon." Margot tapped a manicured nail against her tablet. "However, there is the matter of the gala tomorrow evening. The mayor expects your presence, and the optics require a substantial donation to the Children's Fund." Cristiano scowled, rubbing his jaw. "Charity. A tax on doing business. Handle the donation. And Margot—" He paused, his gaze raking over her. It wasn't a look of desire or even appraisal. It was the cold, calculating look of a man assessing an asset. "You are attending with me." Margot stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Sir? Usually you take Miss Vane." "Elena Vane is a liability. She talks to the press when she drinks," Cristiano said dismissively. "I need someone who can remember names, track conversations, and spot the feds in the room. You." "I understand," Margot said, her voice neutral. She began to calculate the logistics: dress, security detail, conversational landmines. "And Margot," Cristiano added, his tone shifting into something sharper, something distinctly cruel. "Make an effort. The Lombardo name represents power, discipline, and aesthetics. You are the face of this office. I expect you to reflect that. Lose some weight before the summer summit in Sicily. We can't have my primary handler looking like she lacks control." The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the city below seemed to vanish. Margot stood frozen, the insult landing like a physical blow. In 3 years of managing his murders, his money laundering, and his monumental ego, he had never crossed this particular line. He had relied on her brain, ignored her body, and treated her like a highly functional machine. Now he was applying his ruthless standard of perfection to her physical form. A hot flush crept up Margot's neck, but she didn't look down. She met his gaze, her emerald eyes hardening into chips of ice. The sheer audacity of the demand, from a man whose soul was rotting, judging her for her body, was staggering. "My control, Mr. Lombardo," Margot said, her voice steady, terrifyingly calm, "is the only reason you aren't currently under federal indictment for the waterfront zoning bribes. My control manages 34 offshore accounts and 22 shell companies without a single discrepancy." Cristiano's eyes narrowed. No one spoke back. No one. "Are you challenging me, Margot?" "I am stating facts," she replied, her chin lifting. "My value to this organization is not measured by the circumference of my waist. It is measured by the fact that I am indispensable. If you require a decorative ornament for Sicily, hire a model. If you require a strategist, you have me. But I will not apologize for the space I occupy, nor will I alter my body to suit your aesthetic preferences." Cristiano stood slowly, unfolding his massive frame. He planted his hands on the obsidian desk, leaning forward, the predator fully awakened. "You forget who you are speaking to." "I know exactly who I am speaking to," Margot countered, refusing to step back. "And you, sir, are forgetting who keeps your empire from collapsing. I will attend the gala. I will handle the mayor. But I will do it as I am. Good afternoon, Mr. Lombardo." She turned on her heel, the heavy fabric of her skirt swishing, and walked out of the office. Cristiano watched her go, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He was stunned, furious, and for the first time in a decade, entirely unsure of his next move. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was awash in the blinding light of chandeliers and the subtle, sharp scent of wealth and desperation. The mayor's charity gala was the social event of the season, a glittering facade where Chicago's elite mingled with the very elements that poisoned the city. Margot arrived 5 minutes before Cristiano, arriving in a discreet town car. She had chosen her attire with meticulous care. She wore a deep sapphire gown, custom-made, that hugged her curves and flowed elegantly to the floor. It wasn't designed to hide her size, but to celebrate it, the rich color complementing her pale skin and dark hair, which was swept up in an intricate style. She looked regal, a queen entering a room of pawns. When Cristiano arrived, the flashbulbs erupted. He was striking in a midnight blue tuxedo, radiating a dangerous, magnetic energy. He spotted Margot immediately. He paused, a flicker of something. Surprise? Irritation? Grudging respect? Crossing his face before he masked it with his usual stoicism, he approached her, offering his arm. "You look acceptable," he murmured, the closest thing to a compliment he could muster under the circumstances. "Thank you, Mr. Lombardo. You look suitably intimidating," Margot replied smoothly, taking his arm. The physical contact was strictly professional, a necessary performance for the cameras. The evening was a grueling exercise in diplomacy. Margot maneuvered Cristiano through the crowd with expert precision, whispering names, affiliations, and potential leverage before he even shook hands. She intercepted Alderman Davies before he could ask about the sanitation contracts, deflected a probing journalist from the Tribune, and charmed the mayor's wife into securing a favorable seat at the head table. Cristiano watched her operate. He had known she was good, but seeing her in this element, commanding the room without intimidation, relying solely on intellect and presence, was unsettling. She wasn't a shrinking violet trying to hide her size. She was a force of nature. Yet, his pride still stung from her defiance the day before. He couldn't let it go. The Lombardo authority had to be absolute. During dinner, seated next to a particularly tedious federal judge, Cristiano leaned close to Margot. "You're handling the room well," he said softly, for her ears only. "But don't think I've forgotten our conversation. Defiance has consequences, Margot. Even for you." Margot didn't flinch. She took a sip of her water, keeping her gaze on the speaker at the podium. "I am aware of how you operate, Cristiano," she replied, dropping the Mr. Lombardo in a rare breach of protocol. "But you need to be aware of how I operate. If you push this issue, you will find that loyalty is a two-way street." "Are you threatening me?" he hissed, his hand tightening into a fist under the table. "I am advising you," she corrected. "I know the combination to the safe. I know the routing numbers for the Cayman accounts. I know where Carlo buried the evidence from the Solozzo hit. You need me far more than I need to be a size 4. Cristiano went perfectly still. She wasn't bluffing. She was reminding him of the terrifying reality. His secretary held the keys to his destruction. It was a power dynamic he had never fully acknowledged until this moment. He had assumed her loyalty was absolute, bought and paid for. Now he realized it was conditional, based on mutual respect, a respect he had violated. The rest of the evening passed in a tense, simmering silence between them. When they finally left, the ride back to Lombardo Enterprises was suffocating. "You're playing a dangerous game, Margot," Cristiano finally said, as the car pulled into the underground garage. "I'm not playing a game at all," she said, gathering her clutch. "I am setting a boundary. If you cannot respect it, I suggest you begin looking for a replacement. Though, I imagine finding someone who can translate your violent impulses into functional corporate strategy will be difficult." She stepped out of the car without waiting for the door to be opened for her, leaving Cristiano alone in the dark, grappling with a sensation he hadn't felt since he was a street soldier. Fear. The atmosphere in the office the next week was toxic. The unspoken war between the boss and his secretary created a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Cristiano was colder, more demanding, intentionally giving Margot impossible deadlines and complex tasks, hoping to see her crack, to prove that her weight or her defiance was a weakness. Margot didn't crack. She absorbed the pressure, working late into the night, her brilliance shining even brighter under duress. She closed a crucial real estate deal that had been stalling for months, negotiated a truce with a rival gang over territory disputes, and reorganized the laundering structure to be virtually airtight. She was proving her point flawlessly. But the strain was taking its toll. The constant, silent aggression from Cristiano was exhausting. It wasn't just the work. It was the betrayal. She had dedicated years to him, built his empire alongside him, and he was willing to throw it away over his superficial, controlling nature. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Cristiano was in a foul mood, a shipment from South America having been seized by the DEA. He needed someone to blame. He stormed out of his office, tossing a thick file onto Margot's desk. "The shipping manifests for the Miami route. They're a mess. Fix them. Now." Margot looked at the file, then up at him. I didn't handle the Miami route this quarter. You reassigned it to Silvio. Silvio is an idiot. You should have overseen it, Cristiano snapped. You're slipping, Margot. Maybe that extra weight is slowing down your brain. It was a low blow, petty and vicious. It was the moment the fracture became a clean break. Margot stood up slowly. The entire office suite seemed to hold its breath. The few underlings present froze in terror. No, Margot said quietly. Excuse me? Cristiano demanded, stepping closer, his imposing figure looming over her. No, she repeated, her voice gaining strength, echoing in the quiet room. I will not fix Silvio's mistakes. I will not accept your blame for a situation you created by bypassing my authority. And I will certainly no longer tolerate your pathetic, insecure insults regarding my body. She reached down, opened the bottom drawer of her desk, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't the official company ledger. It was her personal failsafe. The master key to the Lombardo Empire. You wanted to test my loyalty, Cristiano, she asked, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that made him step back involuntarily. You wanted to see if I was dispensable. Let's find out. She dropped the ledger heavily onto his desk. I quit. Cristiano stared at the book, then at her. The reality of what she was saying, what she was doing, crashed into him. You can't quit, he growled. You know too much. Nobody just walks away from me. I am walking away, Margot stated, grabbing her coat. And if you or anyone in your organization attempts to stop me or retaliate, that ledger, which contains every digitized piece of evidence of your crimes, will be automatically forwarded to the FBI, the IRS, and the Chicago Tribune. I have dead-man switches set up across 3 separate servers. She walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from him. He could smell her perfume, a sharp, clean scent of bergamot and cedar. You demanded I lose weight to fit your image, Margot said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Congratulations. You just lost the most vital asset in your organization. I'd say that's a significant weight loss. She turned and walked out the glass doors, not looking back. Cristiano Lombardo, the most feared man in Chicago, stood completely paralyzed in his immaculate office, realizing he had just triggered the collapse of his own empire, all because he couldn't see the Titan standing right in front of him. The morning after Margot's departure, Lombardo Enterprises felt like a mausoleum. The sprawling penthouse suite, usually thrumming with the quiet, terrifying efficiency Margot orchestrated, was steeped in an unnatural, suffocating stillness. Cristiano Lombardo sat behind his obsidian desk, the very picture of contained, absolute rage. He hadn't slept. He had spent the entire night staring at the glittering city skyline, replaying her final, defiant words on a loop, the faint, lingering scent of her bergamot and cedar perfume haunting his office like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. The physical ledger she had slammed onto his desk was a decoy, of course, a dramatic, theatrical prop meant to make a point. Cristiano's IT team, a group of pale, nervous hackers working out of a heavily fortified basement in the Loop, had confirmed the worst long before sunrise. The lead tech, sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights, had delivered the news. Margot wasn't bluffing. There were deeply buried, encrypted algorithms woven directly into the foundational code of the company's mainframe, intricately tied to a highly sophisticated dead man's switch. If Margot didn't input a specific, rotating biometric sequence every 48 hours, an avalanche of catastrophic digital evidence would simultaneously flood the secure servers of the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the encrypted tip line of the Chicago Tribune. She built a nuclear option into our proprietary accounting software, muttered Elias Thorne, Cristiano's chief legal counsel, pacing a frantic path into the priceless Persian rug. Elias was a sharp, angular man who usually thrived on finding impossible loopholes and manipulating the law. Today, his tie was loosened, and he looked physically ill, his skin a sallow grey. 3 years of untraceable offshore transfers, the zoning payoffs to Alderman Davies right down to the wire routing numbers, the shell companies in Delaware that hold the deeds to the waterfront. It's all there, Cristiano, beautifully indexed. If that data drops, we aren't just looking at a standard RICO case. We're looking at federal supermax for half the family, asset seizure on a biblical scale, and the absolute dissolution of the Lombardo name. I know exactly what it means, Elias, Cristiano snapped, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated the crystal decanters on his side table. He poured himself a heavy measure of scotch, though it was barely 9 in the morning, the amber liquid burning down his throat. The question isn't what happens if it goes off. The question is, how do we disarm it? We can't, Elias admitted, his voice tight, bordering on a whine. The encryption is military grade, heavily compartmentalized. She didn't build it herself. She contracted an independent, black hat firm out of Zurich to design the architecture under a completely untraceable dummy corporation. By the time our guys even isolate the root directory to attempt a crack, the 48 hours will be up. And if we try a brute force attack to override it, the system recognizes the intrusion and triggers an immediate, irreversible dump. Cristiano slammed his glass onto the desk, the heavy crystal ringing loudly, a sharp crack of sound in the dead air. He had underestimated her. He, a man who prided himself on flawlessly reading people, on anticipating every betrayal before a thought was even fully formed, had completely misjudged the woman who organized his very existence. He had seen a brilliant, terrifyingly capable mind wrapped in a body he arrogantly deemed unacceptable, blinding himself to the apex predator, hiding in plain sight. The vacuum left by Margot's abrupt absence was immediate and catastrophic. Without her, the intricate daily operations of the syndicate began to violently stutter. By noon, Carlo, the massive head enforcer, called to report that the Russo family was stalling on the new union fee agreements again. Margot had always known exactly which psychological lever to pull, a subtle threat to their supply chain here, a minor territorial concession there, to keep the Russos smoothly in line. Carlo's blunt instrument approach, threatening to break kneecaps, was only agitating them, pushing them closer to open rebellion. At 2 p.m., the mayor's chief of staff called, his tone icy, looking for the promised massive donation to the children's fund that secured their political cover. The funds were safely locked in a Cayman account that only Margot and Cristiano had top-tier access to, and Cristiano, to his profound, burning embarrassment, realized he didn't have the secondary, rotating authentication token. Margot kept it encrypted on a separate device. He was locked out of his own vault. The most pressing issue, however, was strictly internal. The 5 families of Chicago operated on a delicate, razor-thin balance of terror, perception, and mutual respect. If word leaked onto the streets that Lombardo's primary handler, the architect of his untouchable status, had walked out, and worse, currently held him hostage by the throat, the wolves would immediately begin to circle, smelling blood in the water. The first vulture to land was Dominic Vane. Dominic was Elena Vane's brother, a mid-level boss with desperate aspirations far above his actual competence. He controlled the gritty Southside gambling rings and had always deeply resented Margot's undeniable, towering influence over Cristiano. He strutted into the penthouse office late that afternoon, smelling strongly of cheap cologne, stale smoke, and unchecked opportunism, wearing a suit that was a shade too shiny. "Cristiano," Dominic sneered, taking an uninvited seat in the leather chair opposite the desk, crossing his legs with forced casualness. "I hear there's a little trouble in paradise today. The big girl finally packed it in? Couldn't handle the pressure?" Cristiano's dark eyes turned glacial. He remained perfectly, terrifyingly silent, letting the temperature in the spacious room drop degree by agonizing degree. Dominic shifted uncomfortably under the dead-eyed stare, but pressed on, his ambition overriding his survival instincts. It's for the best, really. She was a liability, bad for the image. "Look, I've got some girls in my crew who can handle the front desk. Pretty things. They know how to keep their mouths shut and make the right, respectful impression on the guests. And as for the numbers, my guy, Sal, he's a wizard with the books. He can—" "Dominic," Cristiano interrupted. His voice wasn't a shout. It was alarmingly soft, a deadly whisper that cut through the room like a razor. "If you, Sal, or any of your pretty things so much as look at a ledger in this building, I will personally have Carlo feed you to the stray dogs in the Calumet rail yards, piece by bloody piece, while you are still breathing. Do you understand me?" Dominic paled instantly, the greasy bravado evaporating into thin air, leaving only sheer, unadulterated panic. I was just offering to help the family." "Get out!" When Dominic scurried out of the office like a beaten dog, Cristiano leaned back in his chair, feeling a massive, throbbing headache blooming behind his eyes. Margot had completely insulated him from this exact kind of petty, exhausting ambition for years. She expertly managed the fragile egos, flawlessly deflected the sycophants and the parasites, and kept the complex machinery running quietly in the dark so he could focus entirely on the grand strategy of expanding the empire. Now he was bogged down in the filthy mud of daily operations, and the clock was ticking down relentlessly. He had less than 36 hours before the dead man's switch engaged and decimated his life's work. He needed to find Margot. Not to kill her, that would instantly trigger the data dump and seal his fate, but to bring her back. He had to negotiate terms of surrender with the very woman he had so profoundly, arrogantly insulted. It was a bitterly jagged pill to swallow, but Cristiano Lombardo was a survivor above all else. He picked up his secure, encrypted phone and dialed his absolute best tracker. Margot Bernard did not hide. She knew that running or going to ground would only provoke a frantic, violent hunt, and she had absolutely no intention of living the rest of her life looking over her shoulder like prey. Instead, she calmly retreated to the one place Cristiano had never bothered to ask about, let alone visit, her personal sanctuary. Her apartment was a sprawling, light-filled loft in the West Loop, an old industrial space she had meticulously transformed into a breathtaking haven of warmth, safety, and intellect. Walls of original, exposed brick were lined with towering, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that groaned under the immense weight of rare history, philosophy, and advanced economic theory texts. Soft, plush, hand-woven rugs covered the polished hardwood floors, and large, vibrant abstract paintings splashed bold, unapologetic color across the room. It was the complete, intentional antithesis of Cristiano's stark, intimidating, monochromatic office. Margot sat comfortably at her vintage drafting table, sipping a steaming cup of strong Earl Grey tea. She was wearing soft, oversized cashmere, a far, comforting cry from her rigid, tailored armor at Lombardo Enterprises. As she looked out at the city, she practically ran from the shadows. She felt a profound, exhausting sense of physical relief, heavily mingled with a sharp, persistent ache in her chest. She had spent 3 grueling, dedicated years building a bulletproof empire for a man who ultimately, fundamentally viewed her as defective, simply because her physical form didn't fit into a societal sample size. The betrayal stung deeply, a vicious, personal insult that gnawed at her pride. She had genuinely loved the work. The dizzying complexity of managing billions of dollars of illicit, fluid funds, the high-stakes chess game of balancing rival, violent factions, the sheer, intoxicating power of being the brilliant, unseen woman behind the throne. She had thrived on the adrenaline of it all, but she would not sell her soul or her dignity for it, nor would she ever allow herself to be humiliated and diminished by a man whose intellect was secondary to his ego. Her encrypted phone had been ringing incessantly, flashing with alerts since 9 a.m. She had systematically blocked all known Lombardo numbers, routing them to a dead voicemail, but the secondary secure line she maintained, strictly for external emergencies, finally buzzed. It was a number she recognized instantly. Detective Marcus Vance, Chicago PD, Organized Crime Division. Margot had carefully cultivated Vance as a quiet, mutually beneficial, highly deniable contact over the past year. He was a genuinely good cop, deeply frustrated by the systemic, rotting corruption in his own department. She had occasionally fed him carefully selected breadcrumbs, movements of rival gang shipments, locations of low-level, expendable drug busts, to keep him satisfied, off Lombardo's immediate scent, and skillfully direct the CPD's attention exactly where she wanted it. She let it ring 3 times, controlling the pace, before answering. "Detective?" "Margot." Vance's voice was remarkably tense, the sound of a man watching a powder keg spark. "There's a massive, unprecedented tremor running through the syndicate today. The wiretaps on the Russo crew and the Southside boys are lighting up like a Christmas tree. They're saying Lombardo is bleeding out, that his right hand got chopped off overnight. Is this true?" Margot took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch. "I have officially resigned my position at Lombardo Enterprises." "Yes." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. When Vance spoke, his voice was hushed. "Just like that?" "You know as well as I do, Margot, that nobody just resigns from Cristiano Lombardo. They retire in a pine box. I am currently demonstrating that they do, in fact, resign," Margot replied calmly, her tone entirely devoid of fear. "I have ensured my own safety, Marcus. You needn't worry. You're playing with fire, Margot. If Lombardo thinks for 1 second you're a loose end with the keys to his kingdom, he won't hesitate to send a hit squad. He knows perfectly well I'm not a loose end. I'm a loaded, cocked gun pointed directly at his temple," she corrected smoothly. "I appreciate the professional concern, Detective, but I am entirely secure. However, since we are speaking, you might want to look into the corporate structure of a shell company named Apex Holdings, operating out of Delaware. They've been aggressively buying up distressed commercial properties in the South Side. If you follow the money trail regarding their recent acquisitions, you'll find the laundering mechanics utterly fascinating." Vance sighed heavily, the sound of a man realizing he was being handed a loaded weapon. "You're feeding me Dominic Vane's entire operation on a silver platter. Consider it a generous parting gift to the city of Chicago," Margot said, a small, grim smile finally touching her lips. Dominic had always been a loud, vulgar thorn in her side. Neutralizing him would throw the syndicate into further, distracting chaos and keep Cristiano desperately occupied while she solidified her exit. She hung up, feeling a powerful surge of cold satisfaction. She wasn't just surviving the fallout. She was actively, surgically dismantling the very structures she had helped build. As the purple bruise of evening fell over the city, the heavy buzzer to her loft sounded. She glanced at the high-definition security monitor mounted by the door. Standing on the street, looking wildly out of place in the upscale, gentrified neighborhood was Carlo. The massive, scarred enforcer wasn't trying to break in. He was standing directly under a streetlight, looking straight up at her hidden camera, his large hands empty and clearly visible by his sides in a universal gesture of surrender. Margot considered ignoring him, letting him stand in the damp chill. But Carlo wasn't there to kill her. He was reduced to a messenger boy. She buzzed him into the ornate lobby, but firmly locked the secondary, reinforced steel security door to her private floor. A minute later, Carlo's gravelly, hesitant voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Bernard, the boss. He wants to talk." "I have absolutely nothing to say to Mr. Lombardo, Carlo. He said to tell you." Carlo paused, shifting his massive weight, clearly deeply uncomfortable delivering a message of weakness. "He said to tell you the Russos are officially threatening a strike on the docks, the Cayman token is locked out, and he has exactly 30 hours left on the clock. He says he's ready to negotiate terms." Margot closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool wood of the doorframe. The power dynamic had officially, irrevocably shifted. The undisputed King of Chicago was coming to her on his knees, even if his immense pride wouldn't allow him to admit it out loud. "Tell Mr. Lombardo," Margot said, her voice echoing coldly and clearly through the intercom speaker, "that my hourly consulting fee has increased significantly since yesterday. If he wishes to speak, he can meet me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Art Institute, directly in front of Georges Seurat's, a Sunday on La Grande Jatte. He will come completely unarmed, and he will come alone. Miss Bernard, you know he doesn't go anywhere in the city alone." "Those are the non-negotiable terms, Carlo. Good night." She sharply cut the audio feed, leaving the towering enforcer standing impotently in the hallway. Margot walked slowly over to the full-length antique mirror hanging near her door. She looked at herself, at her soft, unapologetic curves, her solid, unmovable presence, the sharp, calculating intelligence burning in her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't see an asset to be managed or a physical liability to be criticized. She saw a woman who currently held the complete, unadulterated fate of the Chicago underworld resting in the palm of her hands, and she looked magnificent. The sprawling galleries of the Art Institute of Chicago were relatively quiet and hushed on a crisp Wednesday morning. Margot arrived 30 minutes early, finding a solitary wooden bench directly opposite Georges Seurat's pointillist masterpiece, a Sunday on La Grande Jatte. She had chosen this specific location deliberately, weaving her message into the very environment. The painting, a massive, meticulously crafted composition of millions of individual dots, required the viewer to step back to comprehend the whole picture. Up close, it was just chaotic, meaningless specks of color. But from a distance, it was a breathtaking masterpiece of control, light, and grand vision. It was a desperately needed lesson for a man who had only ever looked at her up close and entirely missed the grand design. She wore a striking, emerald green wool trench coat that cinched sharply at her waist, an unapologetic, vibrant display of color and form that commanded attention. She felt deeply grounded, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, a stark contrast to the frantic anxiety that she knew surely gripped the powerful man she was waiting for. Promptly at 10 a.m., Cristiano Lombardo walked into the Impressionist gallery. Even stripped of his usual, intimidating entourage of tailored muscle, he was a massive, commanding presence that seemed to shrink the room. He wore a flawless charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but the usual, suffocating aura of invincibility was deeply cracked. There were heavy, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes, and the thick muscle in his jaw ticked relentlessly with suppressed, boiling tension. He looked exactly like a caged, violent tiger suddenly forced to walk on a short leash. He spotted her vibrant green coat immediately and approached, stopping a few careful feet away. He didn't sit. He looked up at the massive painting, his eyes scanning the dots uncomprehendingly, then looked down at her. "Public places," Cristiano said, his voice low and strained, entirely lacking its usual vibrating rumble of authority. "Very theatrical, Margot. Neutral ground," Margot corrected smoothly, not rising to meet him. "And a highly populated place where you cannot afford a violent tantrum. Sit down, Cristiano." He visibly bristled at the sharp command, his deeply ingrained pride flaring hot, but he slowly, stiffly lowered himself onto the opposite end of the long bench. The physical distance between them felt like a yawning, unbridgeable chasm. 24 hours, Cristiano stated flatly, staring at the polished hardwood floor, unable to meet her gaze. "That's exactly what Elias tells me I have before your insurance policy triggers and burns my life to the ground." 23 hours and 40 minutes, Margot replied precisely, glancing at her watch. "But who's counting?" Cristiano finally turned his head to look at her. The familiar, dark anger was there, simmering just below the surface. But beneath it, there was a profound, grudging respect he couldn't entirely hide anymore. "You crippled my entire organization in less than a single day. The Russos are holding 3 international shipments hostage. Dominic Vane is actively trying to stage a Southside coup, and I can't access half my own operational funds. You forcefully proved your point, Margot. You're indispensable. You win. This isn't a game to see who wins. And it isn't about proving a point, Cristiano. It's about consequence," Margot said, her voice incredibly steady and crystal clear. "You believed my loyalty was absolute, something you owned, because you paid me an exorbitant salary and allowed me proximity to your power. You believed you owned me, body and mind, and therefore could dictate the terms of my physical existence. You were wrong. I made a mistake." Cristiano forced the words out of his throat. They sounded like they tasted like ash, ripping against his vocal cords. It was the absolute closest he had come to a genuine apology in 20 brutal years. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. The demand regarding your appearance, it was out of line." Margot didn't soften. She didn't offer him the easy absolution he was fishing for. "It wasn't just out of line at Cristiano. It was incredibly revealing. It showed me that despite my undeniable intellect, despite my years of flawless dedication, protecting your life and your assets, you fundamentally, entirely devalued me, based on an arbitrary, superficial metric. You looked directly at the architect of your untouchable empire, and only saw a woman who didn't fit into a sample-sized designer gown. You only ever saw the dots. You missed the whole picture." Cristiano had absolutely no defense. He had operated his entire life in a shallow, violent world where physical appearances and brute strength equated directly to power, where everyone had a specific, aesthetic role and looked the part of a mobster or a mole. Margot had violently shattered that paradigm, and his mind was struggling desperately to adapt to the new reality. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "More money? A significantly larger, permanent percentage of the legitimate corporate holdings? Name your price, Margot. Give me the key to disable the switch and come back to the office." Margot turned her gaze away from him, looking up at the Surat painting, studying the meticulous, controlled dots of color. "I don't want to come back, Cristiano." Cristiano stiffened, his broad shoulders tensing. Panic flared briefly in his eyes. "Then what the hell is this? Extortion? Are you going to bleed me dry?" "It's a complete severing of ties, executed entirely on my terms," Margot explained, finally turning to look him dead in the eye, her emerald gaze piercing. I am not returning to Lombardo Enterprises. I am permanently done managing your chaos and cleaning up your blood. However, I am not a vindictive woman. I have absolutely no desire to see the 5 families plunge into a bloody, chaotic street war because of your sheer incompetence. Nor do I want the FBI tearing up the city I live in. She reached into the deep pocket of her emerald coat and pulled out a small, heavily encrypted titanium flash drive. She held it up in the air between them, the tiny piece of metal containing the fate of the Chicago underworld. This drive contains the complex, algorithmic key required to permanently disable the dead man's switch, Margot said calmly. But it comes with 3 non-negotiable conditions. Cristiano stared at the drive, his dark eyes hungry and desperate. Name them. First, you will immediately transfer 10% of the legitimate Lombardo commercial real estate holdings into a blind trust under my name. Consider it vastly overdue back pay for my uncompensated overtime. Second, you leave Dominic Vane entirely to the wolves. The CPD is already aggressively looking into Apex Holdings as of this morning. You will not offer him legal counsel, and you will not protect his assets. He's a loud, dangerous liability you need to shed anyway. Cristiano's brilliant, calculating mind raced. 10% of the real estate was a substantial, painful financial hit, but it was survivable and kept him out of federal prison. Losing Dominic was actually a massive tactical benefit, brilliantly masked as a painful concession. And the third condition? He asked warily, waiting for the killing blow. Margot leaned forward slightly, her emerald eyes locking onto his with terrifying intensity. You never contact me again. You do not surveil my apartment. You do not attempt to lure or force me back into your world. We are finished. If I ever, for 1 second, feel a shadow following me on the street, I won't bother using a dead man's switch. I'll just hand the decrypted files directly to the feds myself and watch you burn. Cristiano looked at the magnificent, immovable woman sitting beside him. He saw the cold fire in her eyes, the unyielding, unbreakable strength in her perfect posture. He realized, with a profound, sudden, and devastating sense of loss, exactly what he had foolishly thrown away. He hadn't just lost an exceptionally efficient secretary, he had alienated and lost his only true intellectual equal. "Agreed," he rasped, holding out his large, scarred hand to seal the deal. Margot didn't shake it. She simply dropped the titanium flash drive into his open, waiting palm, her skin never brushing his. "Goodbye, Cristiano. Try to learn how to manage your own empire." She stood up, her vibrant green coat sweeping elegantly around her, and walked away without a single backward glance. Cristiano sat frozen, watching her powerful silhouette disappear into the milling crowd of tourists, leaving him entirely alone with a masterpiece he finally, painfully understood, and a hard-won, devastating lesson about the true, immeasurable weight of loyalty. The immediate weeks following Margot's departure were a chaotic, exhausting trial by fire for Cristiano Lombardo. The encrypted flash drive she had handed over at the museum had worked flawlessly, disabling the nuclear option hanging over his head and securing his freedom. But the damage to his operational structure was profound and immediate. He was forced to scramble, promoting a cobbled-together team of 3 senior associates to handle the sheer volume of workload Margot had managed effortlessly on her own. It was a disaster. None of them possessed her uncanny strategic foresight, her encyclopedic knowledge of their illicit networks, or most crucially, her intimidating calm under pressure. Mistakes were made, money bled through newly formed cracks, and the delicate diplomacy required to keep rival factions appeased frayed at the edges. Despite the chaos, Cristiano honored the exact terms of their agreement. It wasn't just a matter of avoiding her dead man's switch. It was a matter of strange, newfound principle. The real estate trust was established with painstaking legal precision by Elias Thorne, securing Margot's financial independence for life with prime commercial properties in the Loop and River North. And when Detective Vance and the CPD, acting on Margot's tip, raided Dominic Vane's illegal gambling operations, tracing the laundered funds directly back to the Delaware shell company, Apex Holdings, Cristiano issued a strict, unyielding, do not intervene order. Dominic fell, loud and messy. He was dragged out of his Southside club in handcuffs, screaming about betrayal and demanding family protection, while Cristiano watched on the evening news, quietly absorbing Dominic's fractured territory without firing a single shot. It was a cold, pragmatic move that solidified his power and eliminated a noisy liability, but the victory felt surprisingly hollow. Sitting in his penthouse, he found himself constantly looking toward the empty space 3 feet from his obsidian desk, expecting Margot's calm, measured voice to report on a crisis averted before he even knew it existed. He missed the way she could synthesize a 10-page financial report into a single, actionable sentence. The silence in the penthouse was no longer a sign of his absolute control. It was a glaring symptom of his isolation. He began to realize the true, devastating nature of his mistake. He had built his entire life on intimidation, brute force, and transactional loyalty, believing fear was the ultimate, infallible motivator. Margot had operated on a different frequency entirely. Her loyalty hadn't been bought with a salary. It had been earned through a complex intellectual partnership, a mutual, unspoken understanding of the dark complexities of their world. When he had callously reduced her immense value to her physical appearance, demanding she fit a superficial mold, he hadn't just insulted her dignity. He had proven himself fundamentally unworthy of her caliber of intellect. He had treated a grandmaster like a pawn, and she had flipped the board. Meanwhile, Margot Bernard was not resting on her laurels or enjoying a quiet retirement. The West Loop loft transformed from a peaceful sanctuary into a high-functioning command center. Freed from the toxic, perpetually tense environment of Lombardo Enterprises, her mind expanded rapidly, seeking new, complex challenges. She had capital, she had unparalleled expertise, and she had an axe to grind with the establishment. She didn't want to disappear to an island. She wanted to build something formidable of her own, something entirely legitimate that utilized her terrifying efficiency and strategic brilliance without the moral rot of the syndicate. She founded Bernard Consulting, a boutique firm specializing in high-level crisis management, deep forensic accounting, and aggressive corporate restructuring. She leveraged the 10% of Lombardo real estate she now owned as formidable seed capital, creating a legitimate, heavily fortified fortress of her own, free from criminal entanglements. Her first major client came unexpectedly, but perhaps inevitably. Elias Thorne, Cristiano's chief legal counsel, reached out to her a month after she left. He was representing a major, Great Lakes shipping magnate facing a vicious, hostile takeover bid and a quiet, highly damaging federal inquiry into their union practices. Elias knew, better than anyone, that nobody understood the messy intersection of corporate vulnerability, labor disputes, and aggressive leverage better than Margot Bernard. Margot took the meeting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room she had leased in a high-rise downtown, offering a view that rivaled Cristiano's. When Elias walked in, carrying his heavy briefcase, he stopped dead in his tracks and stared. She was wearing a tailored suit in a rich, dark plum that commanded attention, her presence filling the room just as it always had, but now without the shadow of the Lombardo name hanging over her. She looked powerful, entirely unbothered, and completely in her element. "Margot," Elias said, a mixture of deep relief and profound respect in his tone. "It's good to see you. You look, well, the boss. He hasn't been the same. It's a mess over there. Mr. Lombardo's state of mind and the state of his ledgers are no longer my concern, Elias," Margot replied smoothly, her face an unreadable mask as she gestured to a plush leather chair. "Tell me about the shipping magnate. I understand they have a union problem that requires incredibly delicate handling, and a rival board looking to strip their assets. Over the next 6 months, Bernard Consulting became the quiet, terrifying secret weapon of Chicago's corporate elite. Word spread rapidly among the C-suite executives, in hushed tones at the Union League Club and over discreet dinners, that if you had a problem that required absolute discretion, ruthless efficiency, and a mind that could outmaneuver both the IRS and rival megacorporations, you hired Margot Bernard. She wasn't managing syndicate murders or burying bodies anymore, but she was orchestrating corporate takeovers and defending against hostile bids with strategies that were just as brutal and uncompromising. And she was doing it entirely on her own terms, completely unapologetic about who she was, her size, or her formidable intellect. The inevitable collision occurred nearly a year after Margot had walked out of the glass doors of Lombardo Enterprises. Chicago was bidding for a massive, multi-billion-dollar federal infrastructure grant aimed at completely revitalizing the decaying South Side transit system. It was a legitimate, transformative project that promised to reshape the city, and the city's major political and corporate players were all viciously vying for a piece of the action. Cristiano Lombardo, seeking to further legitimize his sprawling empire and subtly launder significant capital through massive public works contracts, had formed a powerful coalition of local construction, engineering, and supply companies. He desperately needed this contract. It was his golden ticket to a legacy that extended beyond blood, bullets, and whispered rumors. A chance to be remembered as a builder rather than a destroyer. However, a rival coalition, backed by a massive, ruthless East Coast conglomerate, had emerged as a formidable, highly sophisticated opponent. They were aggressive, extremely well-funded, and playing exceptionally dirty. They were quietly buying off key city aldermen with dark money packs, launching a devastating, well-coordinated media smear campaign against Lombardo's primary contractors, and weaponizing environmental regulations to stall his permits. Cristiano's new, disjointed team was failing spectacularly to counter the attacks. They were purely reactive, constantly putting out fires and stumbling over the complex regulatory hurdles and the sophisticated, multi-layered political maneuvering of the East Coast group. They lacked vision. Late one evening, Cristiano sat alone in his cavernous office, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was reviewing a disastrous preliminary report that showed his coalition losing ground rapidly. Key swing votes on the city council were slipping away. He rubbed his eyes, a bone-deep exhaustion settling into him. He didn't just need more money or more muscle. He needed a master strategist. He needed a mind that could see the entire board, anticipate the opponent's moves 3 steps ahead, and orchestrate a flawless, devastating counteroffensive. He knew exactly who he needed. There was only one person in Chicago capable of untangling this knot. He also knew the strict terms of their severance agreement. "You never contact me again." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a condition of his continued freedom. Pride warred violently with necessity. For days he tried to force his inadequate team to find a solution, tearing through half-baked plans, firing expensive consultants, and pacing his office like a caged animal. But the cold reality was inescapable. He was hopelessly outmatched in this specific, highly legalized arena of corporate warfare. Finally, A week before the critical city council vote that would decide the fate of the grant, he made the decision. It tasted like defeat, but it was necessary for survival. He wouldn't send Carlo to deliver a message. He wouldn't make a phone call that could be ignored. He would go himself, stripping away his pride. He arrived at the offices of Bernard Consulting unannounced. The space was bright, modern, and intimidating in its sheer, uncompromising professionalism, a stark contrast to the dark leather and shadows of his own domain. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed young man in a crisp suit, informed him with polite firmness that Miss Bernard was in a meeting and could not be disturbed. Cristiano didn't argue. He simply sat in the minimalist waiting area, ignoring the frantic, buzzing calls on his phone from his panicked lieutenants, prepared to wait as long as it took. An hour later, the heavy double doors of the main conference room opened. Margot emerged, accompanied by the CEO of a major tech firm, concluding their meeting with a firm handshake and a confident smile. She turned and saw Cristiano sitting there, looking entirely out of place among the modern art and sleek furniture. For a moment, the air in the reception area stilled. The receptionist tensed. Cristiano stood up slowly. He looked older, the stressful year having carved deeper lines into his handsome face. The aura of absolute, terrifying authority was still there, woven into the fabric of his suit, but it was heavily tempered by something entirely new to him. A reluctant, grinding humility. Margot's expression remained perfectly, chillingly neutral. She didn't look surprised. She had always known he would eventually hit a wall he couldn't break down with violence or money alone. "Mr. Lombardo," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet space, devoid of any warmth or fear. "You are violating the strict terms of our agreement." "I am aware," Cristiano replied, his voice rough, feeling the eyes of her staff on him. "And I am fully prepared to face the consequences, whatever they may be. But I need to hire Bernard Consulting. Today." Margot studied him for a long, agonizing moment. Her emerald eyes analyzed him, noting the exhaustion, the desperation hiding behind his stoic mask, the fact that he had come alone. He wasn't there to demand obedience. He was there to plead for her intellect. "My office," she said simply, turning on her heel without waiting to see if he followed. Cristiano followed her into a spacious, sunlit corner office that overlooked Lake Michigan. It was elegant, commanding, and impeccably organized. He stood awkwardly as she sat behind a large, custom mahogany desk, gesturing with a pen for him to take the smaller chair opposite her. "The South Side Transit Grant," Margot said before he could even open his mouth. "Your coalition is bleeding support by the hour. The East Coast group has Alderman Davies and Rossi squarely in their pocket, and your PR strategy regarding the fake environmental impact study they leaked is laughably inadequate. You are being outplayed on every front." Cristiano stared at her, stunned by her precision. "You've been tracking it." "I track everything in this city that involves billions of dollars, Cristiano. It's my job." She leaned back, resting her hands on the desk, the picture of absolute control. "You are losing. Badly. By next Tuesday, your coalition will be dead in the water. That's exactly why I'm here. I need you to fix it. I need you to run the counter-offensive and salvage this." Margot let the silence stretch, heavy and pregnant with history. She held all the power in the room, a complete, total reversal of the dynamic they had shared a year ago when he had stood over her and demanded she shrink herself. "My services are exceptionally expensive," Margot said finally, her tone businesslike. "And as a rule, I do not work for criminals or syndicates." "This is a legitimate contract," Cristiano argued, leaning forward, his voice urgent. "Clean money, clean businesses. I'm trying to build something real. The subsidiary businesses might be clean, but the man at the top is not. However, she paused, her eyes glinting with a sharp, calculating light that he recognized and feared. I am willing to make an exception and take you on as a client, but not for your money. I have plenty of that. Cristiano frowned, confused. Then what do you want? Name it. Control, Margot stated flatly, the word dropping like an anvil. Absolute control. If I take this project, I run it entirely. Your team reports directly to me. You report to me. I make every decision regarding strategy, personnel, messaging, and political maneuvering. You provide the resources, the funding, and the muscle if I ask for it. And otherwise, you stay out of my way. She leaned forward, closing the distance. And one more thing. A non-negotiable term. You will publicly dissolve your controlling interest in the remaining shell companies operating in the South Side, turning those properties over to the city's affordable housing initiative. You want to build a legitimate legacy? Start by cleaning up your own mess and giving something back to the neighborhoods you've bled. It was an audacious, staggering demand, stripping him of both operational control and significant hidden assets that generated millions. But Cristiano looked at the woman sitting across from him. He saw the brilliant architect he had foolishly, arrogantly driven away, now operating at the absolute height of her power, entirely on her own merit. He realized in that moment that he didn't just need her to win the grant. He needed her to prove to himself that he could evolve beyond the brute force of his past, that he could accept leadership from someone whose mind was superior to his own. "Done," Cristiano said, his voice firm and resolute. The ensuing week was a masterclass in modern strategic warfare, fought not with guns in alleyways, but with leverage, compromised information, and impeccable timing. Margot operated with a terrifying, breathtaking grace. She didn't just counter the East Coast group's moves. She systematically dismantled their entire foundation. She unearthed the buried, convoluted financial ties between the rival coalition and the allegedly independent environmental auditors who had released the damaging report. She didn't just leak the information to the Tribune, she delivered it with surgical precision to the investigative desk, complete with offshore routing numbers. She then leveraged her extensive, quiet contacts to isolate Alderman Davies, reminding him, in a very private meeting, of certain highly illegal zoning indiscretions that Bernard Consulting had meticulously documented during her tenure at Lombardo Enterprises. Davies, sweating profusely, flipped his vote within 24 hours, taking 2 other aldermen with him. Cristiano watched her work, relegated to the unfamiliar role of a silent observer in his own massive operation. He saw how her newly assembled team respected her, not out of the paralyzing fear he utilized, but out of genuine awe for her competence and her unwavering standards. She was a leader who demanded excellence and led by brilliant example, her physical presence no longer a point of contention, but a testament to her unyielding strength and immovable will. On the decisive day of the city council vote, Margot and Cristiano stood together in the back of the grand, echoing chamber. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, the air thick with anticipation and the hum of anxious lobbyists. When the final tally was loudly announced, definitively awarding the transit grant to the Lombardo coalition by a surprisingly wide margin, the room erupted in shouts and applause. Cristiano turned to Margot, the tension draining from his broad shoulders. The victory was immense, not just financially, but politically, securing his legitimate legacy for decades to come and effectively walling off his empire from federal scrutiny. "We won," he said, the profound relief evident in his usually guarded voice. "I won," Margot corrected him gently, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You financed it, and you stayed out of my way." Cristiano let out a short, genuine laugh, a rare, unguarded sound that turned a few heads. Fair enough. You earned every bit of that arrogance. They walked out of City Hall together, stepping into the bright, blinding Chicago afternoon. The local press corps was waiting in a frenzy, flashbulbs popping and reporters shouting questions as they emerged onto the steps. A prominent reporter shoved a microphone toward them, nearly hitting Cristiano. "Mr. Lombardo, a massive, unexpected victory for your coalition today after trailing all week. To what do you attribute this incredible late-stage turnaround?" Cristiano stopped dead. He looked at the reporter with his cold, dark eyes, then slowly turned his gaze to Margot standing beside him. She stood tall, radiant and commanding, in a sapphire blue suit that echoed the one she wore to the gala a year prior, unapologetically taking up space, her sharp intelligence shining brighter than any flashbulb. "I attribute it entirely to the brilliant, unparalleled strategy of my lead consultant, Margot Bernard," Cristiano said clearly, his deep voice carrying easily over the noise of the crowd, ensuring every camera caught it. He didn't just mumble her name. He ensured she received the full, unadulterated credit she deserved. She is, without a doubt, the most formidable mind in this city, and this victory belongs to her. Margot looked at him, genuinely surprised by the sweeping public acknowledgement. It wasn't a private apology whispered in a dark office, but it was an admission of immense respect, a public recognition of her true value that went far beyond the physical limitations he had once tried to impose on her. As they walked toward their respective waiting cars, escaping the press scrum, Cristiano paused. "Margot," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for her. "Thank you. Truly." "You're welcome, Cristiano," she replied, her tone even. "The bill for the property transfers to the Affordable Housing Initiative will be sent to Elias tomorrow morning. I expect it to be expedited." "I expect nothing less. It will be paid." He hesitated, looking at the empire she had built for herself. "You built something incredibly impressive here. You proved me wrong about everything." "I didn't do it to prove you wrong, Cristiano," Margot said softly, her striking emerald eyes meeting his dark ones with absolute clarity. "I did it to prove myself right." She turned and walked toward her sleek black car, her posture perfect, her presence undeniable and immense. Cristiano watched her go, finally, truly understanding the true weight of loyalty. It wasn't about blind submission or shrinking yourself to fit into a lesser man's mold. It was about recognizing the immovable, undeniable strength in another person, and having the wisdom and the humility to respect it. Margot Bernard's extraordinary journey from an underestimated, deeply overlooked secretary to the absolute most powerful strategic mind in Chicago's cutthroat corporate world proves that true strength isn't measured by a dress size or an aesthetic standard, but by the undeniable weight of your intellect, the profound depth of your resilience, and the unyielding courage to demand the respect you inherently deserve. She refused to change herself to fit Cristiano Lombardo's narrow, toxic world. Instead, she forced the entire world to expand and accommodate her brilliance. If you found Margot's incredible story of triumph, strategic genius, and unapologetic self-worth inspiring, please smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a powerful reminder of their own inherent power, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, real-life stories of resilience, justice, and the undeniable truth that true, lasting power always comes from within. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Margot's revenge.